Hello, you're watching Outsiders with Rita Panahi, James Morrow and myself, Rowan Dean. 4.5 years ago, in February 2017, the then Treasurer, Scott Morrison, rose in Parliament with an unusual prop in his hand, a lump of the finest Australian black coal.
Speaker, this is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
The Treasurer knows the rule on props.
It's coal. It was dug up by men and women who work and live in the electorates of those who sit opposite. From the Hunter Valley, as the member for Hunter would know. It's coal that has ensured for over 100 years
The Deputy Prime
Australia
Minister
has enjoyed an energy competitive advantage that has delivered prosperity to Australian businesses and has ensured that Australian industry has been able to remain competitive on a global market. Mr. Speaker, those opposite have an ideological, pathological fear of coal. There's no word for coalophobia officially, Mr. Speaker, but that's the malady that afflicts those opposite. But it's that malady, Mr. Speaker, that is afflicting the jobs in the towns and the industries and indeed in this country because of their pathological, ideological opposition to coal being an important part.
Coal, the secret of our success. 4.5 years ago. Was Scott Morrison lying then? Was he wrong then? Was his information incorrect? Were his assumptions faulty? No, 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 and no. So why this week did he say this?
Addressing climate change is a challenge that we must do together. As Prime Minister, it's my job to bring people together on dealing with this big change. The world is moving into a new energy economy. We all know that. It's now a question of how, not if.
Hold your horses, Prime Minister, not so fast. Clearly something has changed dramatically over the last 4.5 years. Scott Morrison has done a complete 180-degree U-turn, adopting the very plans that we, the Australian people, comprehensively rejected at the last election, and answering not to us, but to the globalist gabfest in Glasgow, COP26 in November. So what has changed since February 2017 when Scott Morrison accurately said that coal is crucial to your jobs, Australian jobs, our standard of living? Something must have. So let's go back to basics. The entire climate change theory is built on a single premise, that the world is getting warmer. So has the planet got warmer since February 2017? No, it hasn't. According to the latest UHV6 satellite measurements, which infers the temperature of various atmospheric layers by measuring the oxygen radiance in the microwave band, we can see that the world's average temperature was exactly the same back in 2017 and even back before then. Similarly, the data from HADCRUT-4, which combines sea surface temperature records with land surface air temperature records, again, no warming in over 7 years. Certainly not since 2017, and if anything, a slight cooling of the planet since Scott Morrison took his lump of beautiful black Aussie coal onto the floor of our Parliament. So, no one could possibly have a change of heart between 2017 and now based on the planet warming up, for the simple reason that those charts demonstrate that it hasn't. If not the Earth's temperature, could it be perhaps the political landscape that's changed since February 2017? Has the electorate warmed to the idea of global warming since February 2017? Only one federal election has taken place in the last 4.5 years since Scott Morrison insisted coal was critical to your well-being, and that was the 2019 federal election. Repeatedly during that election campaign, in which Bill Shorten's Labor Party promised a 45% reduction, less than Morrison is talking about, in emissions, we were told that 2019 was the climate change election.
This coalition, Liberal National Government, has been in chaos over climate change, what to do about it. They've had 13 energy policies. We've had a Prime Minister brandishing coal in the Parliament. And right now, people are wanting action on climate change. They want a government that takes the issue seriously and takes real action. And, you know, while as I said, don't agree with these protesters' methods, I understand their frustration. It's one shared by the Australian people. And vote 1 Labor for real action on climate change.
Now, you may remember that with the notable exception of, well, myself, Alan Jones, Miranda Devine, the entire mainstream media in Australia were as one in predicting that Labor would win that election. The Australian people disagreed.
It has been those Australians who have worked hard every day. They have their dreams, they have their aspirations. To get a job, to get an apprenticeship, to start a business, to meet someone amazing, to start a family, to buy a home, to work hard and provide the best you can for your kids, to save for your retirement, and to ensure that when you're in your retirement that you can enjoy it because you've worked hard for it. These are the quiet Australians who have won a great victory tonight.
Yes, they did. So no, the political landscape has not changed. And it is those same hard-working Australians who this week have been stabbed in the back by the Liberal Party. Every one of you. A complete and utter betrayal. But I hear you say the opinion polls show people are in favour of net zero by 2050. According to the West Australian, for example, almost 80% of West Aussies support net zero by 2050. Don't you just love the way the page is burning up? So subtle. I wonder if their polling questions were just as subtle. And plenty of other polls have magically appeared this week proclaiming majority support for net zero. Apparently, Scott Morrison had one of them in the party room. Really? Really? The same people in the same opinion polls who told us categorically and unequivocally that Labor would win the last election, now assert that the majority of Australians have completely changed their mind on a key issue since that last election. I think we can afford to treat the polls with the scepticism they deserve. And we've also been inundated this week with a massive propaganda campaign. Sorry, a fascinating and inspirational stories full of brilliant ideas and initiatives designed to put Australia on a path to a net zero future, courtesy of a bizarre advertorial-style campaign with 16-page wraparounds and article after article, all called Mission Zero, run by News Corps newspapers around the country. Owners of this network, so yes, my bosses. So, just a friendly tip, guys. My experience over many years in advertising, successful years, tells me that the more words and pictures you have to rely on to sell your message, the less convincing your product is. But anyway, should we take Mission Zero seriously? Well, only if the journalists involved provide concrete and verifiable evidence of how much the planet has warmed in the last 7 years to contradict the charts I just showed earlier. Because if the planet isn't warming year upon year, as the global warming theory insists it is, then the theory is wrong and the whole exercise is not only futile, but potentially disastrous for your jobs, your livelihoods, your kids' prosperity. Our nation. And only if the journalists provide credible information as to what the worst case scenarios are for every household and demographic in Australia under a net zero situation to sit alongside the endless pie in the sky fantasies about the bountiful jobs and green hydrogen and all the rest of it that don't yet and may never exist. Well, in an astonishing coincidence of timing, not only the Prime Minister, not only his colleagues, not only News Corps, but also the Business Council of Australia also came out this week calling for net zero by 2050. Must be something in the water. The Business Council of Australia is demanding a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030 in order to avoid a costly and damaging game of climate catch-up. But again, hold your horses. Because it was only as recently as 2018 that the Business Council of Australia were adamant that Bill Shorten's target of reducing emissions by 45% by 2050 would be so disastrous it would wreck our economy. So again, I ask, were the Business Council of Australia lying back then, 3 years ago, or are they lying now? So, presumably the only thing that could have changed, if it isn't the planet warming and it isn't the political landscape. It must be the lived experience of other countries around the world and observable evidence that renewables do provide a reliable, stable and affordable form of energy on which to build national prosperity. Well, again, no. In fact, if we look to Europe and parts of Asia, the opposite is true. We are currently seeing a global energy crisis. Britain, where ironically Scott Morrison is heading off in 2 weeks' time to the Glasgow COP26 conference to commit Australia to net zero, is currently going through the worst energy crisis since the 1970s, with electric trains having to be ditched in favour of diesel trains, where businesses are shutting down because of soaring energy costs, including factories closing down that normally produce steel, glass, ceramics, and even paper. Maybe the Daily Telly and the Herald Sun and the others might like to ponder the irony of that just for a second. Net zero emissions means net zero newsprint. And even more ironic, much of the problem has been caused by the failure of windmills because of a lack of wind. Shelves are empty and there's talk of bringing in a 3 or 4 day week in Britain in order to ration energy supplies. And in Europe, in anticipation of a very cold winter, old coal plants are already being fired up because wind, biomass, solar and gas can't keep up with demand. According to Professor Gautam Kalgartki from the Global Warming Policy Foundation, the UK government's plans to decarbonise the economy are doomed to fail. Fraser Nelson in the UK Telegraph points out that there is no net zero strategy, just a wish list. And speaking of blackouts, India and China, the world's biggest carbon emitters, are desperate for coal as they battle major energy crises of their own. In Singapore, 2 energy suppliers folded this week. Oh, and China has also announced that Xi Jinping will not be attending the Glasgow Gabfest. Wonder why? Let the West destroy themselves, I imagine Xi's thinking. They don't need my help. So, what has changed since 2017? Not the temperature of the planet, not the political landscape in Australia, certainly not any positive proof of the value of renewables, quite the opposite. No, what has changed is that the 2 most important leaders in the Democratic West are duds, Joe Biden and Boris Johnson. Neither has a political agenda worth 2 bob. Both are presiding over monumental failures and crises of their own making, and both have seized upon the ridiculous Build Back Better and net zero climate change mantras to distract from their failures, and they've roped us, little Australia, in as the sacrificial goat. The ultimate irony, as major newspapers deluge us with 16-page wraparounds of global warming propaganda. It was freezing cold and pouring with rain every day on the eastern seaboard. As a host of energy-guzzling lovies pack their bags to head off to the global warming Gabfest, everyday Brits are forced to queue for petrol or scour empty shelves as they prepare for a freezing winter of power cuts in which, no doubt, people will die for lack of warmth and heating. As Scott Morrison announces without any mandate and in a complete betrayal of the quiet Australians who voted him in against all the odds, that coal is finished in this country, China and India are desperately scouring the planet for more coal. And oh, here's another irony. Scott Morrison making his announcement to attend the global warming conference before the weather turns cold.
We have the weather set in. The first of those is overnight. I confirmed my attendance at the Glasgow Summit, which I'm looking forward to attending. It's an important event. The government will be finalising its position for me to take to that summit prior to my departure over the next fortnight. We are working through those issues with our Cabinet and with our colleagues, and I look forward to those discussions concluding over the next couple of weeks. And I simply say to everyone that net zero was an outcome that I outlined at the beginning of this year, consistent with our Paris commitments.
Well may you look around as the cold and the rain sets in, Prime Minister, and well may you stumble over explaining what net zero really means, because net zero is at best a mirage, at worst a fraud. Australians deserve to see real costings and what this will do to their electricity and food costs. Australians deserve to know how much of their money, through subsidies and handouts, is being earmarked to give to billionaires to splurge on risky, unproven, uneconomic, unreliable green projects and technologies. Even the ABC admits that to produce green hydrogen, for example, as Twiggy Forrest proclaims he can, you need vast plains of solar panels, wind turbines and hydroelectricity schemes on a scale hitherto unimaginable, all paid for, of course, by you and your kids, the taxpayers. Gina Rinehart admitted this week that solar energy is simply unaffordable without endless government subsidies. If Australia's richest woman can't afford renewables, trust me, neither can the rest of us. The Prime Minister admitted this weekend that net zero is as much about global economic interests as about the environment. In other words, we are being played by a bunch of greedy globalist hedge fund managers who have threatened not to invest in Australia unless we ditch our greatest asset, coal. This is thuggish corporate fascism. Nothing more, nothing less. If we wish to be a free and independent people, we must stand up against this bullying and this tyranny, as did our forefathers. That our governments are incapable of protecting our interests is no reason for us to roll over and submit. There are numerous politicians, including some members of the Nationals, including One Nation, of course, including Craig Kelly's United Australia Party, including Campbell Newman's Liberal Democrats, and Reignite Democracy Australia, and many others, who are all determined to resist these and other obliterations of our freedoms in defiance of the Liberal Party and of Labor. Our only hope now is that these parties, these individuals, either separately or as some kind of coalition, hold the balance of power after the next election so that this socialist madness can be stopped, this globalist insanity, before it destroys our prosperity. You have a vote at the next election. Use it wisely. As for the Liberal Party, when it comes to your vote and mine after this week, they deserve a big fat net zero.